This is a very special group. This is a group that has been working for the last few years on the topic of agency of marginalized peoples in the emergence of the Creole languages of the Atlantic and the Pacific.
Our presentation today is titled Afro-Caribbean Women, Resistance and Transmission of Language and Culture. Under the patriarchal gaze, resistance often centers around momentary, sensational, and conspicuously public acts of destruction and violent disruption. When women become agents of resistance, however, their transformative agendas are often expressed through more sustained, subtle, and apparently unremarkable and private acts of creative preservation and continuity.
For once, the slave is seen or heard as a human being. It becomes increasingly difficult to justify her existence as a chattel. African-descended women served at the beginning of the slave family and were instrumental in the preservation of the Afro-Caribbean culture of their communities. As in the west of the Caribbean,
of the Afro-Caribbean Creole population, both among their own African-descended children as well as among European-descended children under their care. In 1750, Suriname, Elizabeth Sanford, an Afro-Caribbean woman who had remained resistant endeavor.
For the slave music constituted a means of ineffable resistance. Traces of that musical revolt are still visible or, as Gilbert argues, audible today. The irrepressible rhythms of the once forbidden of drum are often still audible in their work. Its characteristics and capacious still animate the basic desires to be free and to be oneself.
The performance of the dance, along with the biting social critique of the lyrics sung by the women, led to Tamboo being persecuted for years by both the Catholic Church and the colonial government. Traces of resistance and subversion are still evident in the lyrics of contemporary Afro-Caribbean women artists.
They were using different languages as disguises, essentially, and they were plurilinguistic. However, in the 18th century, we have this change and this movement towards a recognisable pirate flag. I've got some examples for you here. And you can see they're not what we might consider today as the advertised. Probably the John Rackham one is the one we perhaps might recognise most, but with the bows instead of the swords. But you can see they all have a series of motifs: a black background, skeletons or skulls in some way, some kind of knife or scythe, often references to blood or bleeding hearts. And one of my theories is that this was also happening linguistically, that we're moving away from using other people's banners and flags, other people's languages, and the pirate communities were developing their own varieties, which, just like the flags, were not identical, but were based on a series of common motifs. So the second
entretenido cultural. ¿Cómo sería hablar en el idioma del cuerpo parturiente? ¿Y qué efecto tiene la lengua en las percepciones que tienen las mujeres sobre sus experiencias biológicas? La lengua es el filtro a través del cual interpretamos y expresamos las experiencias. Algunos teóricos contemporáneos insisten en que es el medio a través del cual se construye la vida social. En los Estados Unidos, ese medio es hegemónicamente tecnomédico. El discurso alternativo y profusamente orgánico de las mujeres que paren en el hogar también está comenzando a estudiar.
It is my contention that true story of maroons and marronage has been silenced by historical writing about the Caribbean, in which the propagation of dominant discourses of power, economics, race, and gender have served to minimalize or completely erase maroons' considerable accomplishments and achievements.
Una política gubernamental que lleva a cabo un control regulador sobre la población, más específicamente sobre la dimensión corporal y privada del ciudadano. La biopolítica entrelaza fuertes vínculos con la noción de vida, a la cual Foucault no otorga un valor ontológico, sino que la considera vida abierta, o sea, sujeta a las estrategias discursivas de poder y saber. El poder.
Their own ancestral language as a prestige variety. Given the recent demographic trends in Limón, where more Spanish speakers are moving into the province, there has been an erosion in the access to power that Afro-Libonese once had. According to Fishman, the resultant inequalities of power could mean that the members of a linguistic minority group is at a disadvantage educationally and socially. Hagen points out that in many contact communities, there is a transitional stage before a complete shift to the prestigious or dominant language. Creole is according to Winkler, this process has begun in Limon, since Limonese Creole is no longer the language of prestige and its domains are now shared with Spanish. Herspel, the leading researcher on Limonese Creole, makes an important point, saying that the people of Limon are in the process of restructuring their roots and incorporating more elements of the prestige language in the grammar. The influence of Spanish on Limonese Creole resulted in